In this video, we're going to be creating this pretty neat CSS animation. So let's get started. Now I'm going to go ahead and add an H1 with whatever text I want. So for me, it's going to be CSS artist. Use whatever you want. I already imported the Oswald font from Google Fonts. So that's the font I'm going to be using. So I'm going to select the body and give it a font family of Oswald with a backup of sans serif. Now we want to center the H1 horizontally and vertically. So for that, I'm going to use display flex. Now give it a justified content of center and align items center. Now align items centers everything vertically, but, well, not everything. It centers the flex children vertically, but since the body doesn't have an explicit height set, right now it's only as tall as the content inside of it. So if we were to give it a height of 100 viewport height, it'll actually get centered vertically. Okay, now one thing I'm going to be using here is font size of 1 vmin. The vmin units are a little bit outside of the scope of this video, but just know that it's going to help us make our text more responsive. And I encourage you to look up the 1 vmin and see exactly how it works, especially in relation to like EMs and REMs. So let's go ahead and select our H1 and give this a font size of 20 EM. And you can see exactly what I mean when I say the 1 vmin is going to help us out. See, so now it's responsive. It'll shrink and get bigger with the screen. All right, now let's give this a letter spacing of 1 pixel, just make it a tiny bit wider. And now let's start with our background image. So I gave mine a linear gradient. I'm going to just paste it because it's a lot easier than typing all of that out, but just know that it is a rainbow gradient that I made that I thought looks pretty cool. All right, so how do we get the background to not just be a background and just kind of like hug the text instead? Well, for that we use WebKit background clip text. And what that does is that it clips the backgrounds to only be where the text is. Great, Cass. Now we actually can't see the backgrounds or anything. Well, so to actually see the backgrounds through the text, we're going to want to give it a stroke. So to do this, let's go WebKit text stroke. And let's go with 5 pixels red, just so you can see exactly what it does. I put red. This is not a border. Okay. Okay, so now if we look here, we see that the gradient is just a little bit outside of the text, so it's just hugging it. So in order to be able to see the background that we know is behind CSS artist and have it hug the corners, we're going to want to give this a stroke, the text a stroke. So we're going to go with WebKit text stroke. And for now, I'm going to give it 5 pixels red just so you can see exactly what it does. So the text stroke just gives the text a stroke, right? So we see here that it's red. Now what happens if we make it transparent? Well, now the gradient comes through, which is pretty neat. I'm going to actually make this a little bit bigger so we can see it a little more clearly. Let's go with 25 actually. Perfect. Okay. I'm not going to keep it at 5 pixels though, because as you see here, if we make it more responsive, the 5 pixels gets pretty big when the text is super tiny. So for that, I'm going to go ahead and go with 0.025 EM. And now when we make it smaller, it doesn't crowd it as much. One thing that I hate right now, though, since I made it bigger, is the way the text kind of ends up wrapping. So what we want to do is add white space, no wrap, and that will prevent the text from wrapping into a new line. But now it's too big, so let's go with 23. There we go. Perfect. Okay. So now that we have our gradient hugging the text, let's go ahead and start with our animation. So we're going to start with the keyframe, and I'm going to name mine Gradient Annie. And what we do here is 100%, and we change the background position. I'm going to go with 1000 pixels and for the X and 0 for the Y. So then we go back to our H1 and we say Gradient Annie for animation, Gradient Annie. We're going to go 6 seconds, linear, infinite, so it plays forever, then forwards or alternate. Cool. So now the background is actually moving. To see exactly what's going on here, let's unclip the text. And this is what's happening. The background is just moving. Let's actually make this just a little bit smaller. We'll go with 960. All right. Now another animation that I added to this just to make it a little bit cooler was a hue animation. So keyframes, hue, and then I went 0% to 100% WebKit. Filter. And then I went with hue rotate, 0 degrees. But at 50%, I did WebKit filter hue rotate of 360 degrees. Now, what exactly does that do? Let me show you. Let's go ahead and add a comma here. And let's copy this down so we don't have to write it all down. And then we replace this with hue, and let's remove this comma. And now the hue changes. So let's go ahead and reclip the text. And there you go, that's the animation. Extra things that I did add are a background with the radial gradient. So background radial gradient. I gave it a 434343 and a RGBA of 000.9. And then if you go back here, you see that it actually has like a shadow on it. So for that, to achieve that, I added 2 different shadows. One was a text shadow and one was a filtered drop shadow. So to add the text shadow, let's go text shadow. And we go 5px, 5px, 10px, RGBA. So that's going to be black, but not full black. Okay, so now we see it has a little bit of shading under it. Now let's go ahead and add the other drop shadow. So to achieve this, I had to add it to the keyframe because you can really only have a property once. Otherwise, this overrode any WebKit filter that I added because drop shadow is a property of the filter. So what I did was add a drop shadow of 3 pixels, 3 pixels, 1 pixel, and then again, almost full black, but not full black. We copy it back down here. Okay, yeah, I just had to remove the comma. So one thing that's going to bother me is that it's not perfectly aligned. So I went ahead and got the width of our H1, which is 864. And so now it's going to go all the way to the left and then come back perfectly without any kind of weird skipping. All right, so there's the CSS animation. I hope you learned something new. Let me know if you have any questions, and thanks for watching.